The meeting of the Metropolitan Council Transportation Committee for Monday, September 23rd, 2019. Our first item of business is approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any changes or additions to the agenda?
Madam Chair, I would like to propose a change that we move business item 2019-213 to the last business item on the agenda.
I have a motion for an amended agenda. Is there any other changes or additions, or can I get a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We have approved agenda. Next, we are on to approval of the minutes of the August 2016, 2019 meeting. Did anyone have any changes or additions? Not, I entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And the minutes are approved. Next, we have employee recognition. We have Metro Transit General Manager.
Yes, Madam Chair, we have 5 employees being recognized tonight. One was not able to join us, but 4 are here. And they're all related to some of the C-line work that occurred and some curriculum for training and other sort of activities related to C-line. And I'm going to ask Dan Stouffer and Antoinette Rassan to give a description of the awards and the awardees, please. Introduce the awardees.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Antoinette Brisson. I'm the manager of street operations, and I will be recognizing my assistant manager, Demetrius Bell, who is not present today due to an emergency, and one of my street supervisors, Lance Wallace. Since Lance is here, I'll start with him. And I'm nominating Lance Wallace for consideration for the reason for the nomination is in January of 2019, Lance took over as the C-line street supervisor. He was excited to see this project come to a reality. Immediately, he was fully engulfed in all the needs prior to opening day. Lance did an amazing job of collaborating across departments and keeping the street operations management team up to date on all aspects of what was happening. Lance proactively thought about the what-ifs by planning for and adjusting as necessary. He used the wealth of knowledge from the lead instructors when working through standard operating procedures. His persistence, professionalism, his passion, and positive demeanor regarding C-line made him a pleasure to work with. He received numerous internal kudos for a job well done as it related to his work on this project. He remained excited through many meetings and other tasks while still maintaining his other duties as a street supervisor. C-line has successfully opened, however, Lance's determination is still as strong as it was when he first received this assignment. Through the opening weekend, he kept everyone up to date on any issues, and today is still providing feedback on how things are going, giving recommendations for any improvements. So I would like to again say congrats and thank you for a job well done, Lance.
Thank you.
You have another?
Yes.
Is that correct? Yes.
Demetrius was the management lead for the C-line as we prepared for the C-line to move into operations. He took over coordination meetings and was responsible for his C-line supervisors pulling all things together across department, from stop changes, signage, assisting in operator training, and operating procedures. This was a new territory and Demetrius took it with stride. He put in countless hours to make sure that the operations handling of this was comparable to the A-line. He did a great job of keeping me up to date with progress, and his C-line staff knew that their input mattered. As an assistant manager of street operations, demands are ever competing. Demetrius was able to successfully navigate through this and utilized his team, ensuring that the role in C-line moving to operations was successful. Demetrius' professionalism has gained internal recognition in addition to his calm and sensible approach and his desire to produce quality results. He wasn't afraid to work hand in hand with his lead, Lance Wallace, on opening day for barricade placement. He was also in constant contact throughout the weekend for status updates after Saturdays when it opened the launch. He was excited to be a resource to the next manager on our team who is currently handling the next line of BRTs for continued success. Demetrius' ability to find his way during the planning portion is nothing short of dedication. Again, great job to Demetrius as well.
And make sure to pass that round of applause on to Demetrius for us.
And then, Madam Chair, Dan Stouffer is here to present to three individuals recognition awards, and then we'll do the plaques afterwards.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you. Madam Chair and committee members, my name is Dan Stauffer. I'm the manager of the Instruction Center for Metro Transit. Today, it's a privilege to speak to you and also introduce you to these men that are standing beside me. They were nominated for their great work on the C-Line project. This gentleman over here is C.J. Camp. The gentleman standing on my right side is Scott Gesture, and then, of course, Henry Bridges over here. They're all instructors for Metro Transit, and they currently work out of the Instruction Center and Haywood Garage. We'll start with CJ. CJ was the lead curriculum creator or designer for the C-Line. He attended meetings, met with people from all other departments to educate himself on the characteristics of the C-Line. He created several standard operating procedures, designed handouts. He produced an extensive PowerPoint and created an in-house video that was used by our classroom instructors. CJ's curriculum was taught to many different people throughout Metro Transit, including operators, supervisors, managers, directors, and others. Next, we'll discuss Scott and Henry. Scott and Henry were the lead classroom instructors for the C-Line project. They trained over 400 people, 400 operators on the C-Line over several weeks, and also taught many other people from the operating department. They made sure that the bus drivers who are driving buses on this corridor were trained thoroughly so that buses can operate efficiently and in a safe manner. As you all know, bus operators have some challenging schedules. They work mornings, afternoons, evenings, and even a lot of weekends. Because of that, Scott and Henry and their families had to be very flexible so that we could get this training done in the time allowed. You should be very proud of these gentlemen. I am. They are a great example of what Met Council employees are all about. They work hard, they're creative, they're dedicated to the task at hand, they have an open mind, take suggestions well, they have a backbone and aren't afraid of expressing their opinions based on their many years of experience. They treat people well, they are easy to work with, they're smart, they're fun, and when it comes right down to it, they get the job done. So guys, congratulations on this great accomplishment. Be proud of yourself as you work hard to make Metro Transit shine. I'm grateful that you're on my team.
Wow.
Thank you for your work. I appreciate it very much. Oh, I know who this is. Hey, Tilda. Hey, how are you? Congratulations. Thank you. And thank you all for your hard work. Very good. Next, we move on to the next order of business, which is our tab liaison report. Mr. Deacon.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Vice Chair, committee members, General Manager Koistra, Director Thompson, and of course Becky, who keeps this bus moving. Oh, I was going to say train, but I thought it was not. The first part is my most favorite part. I'm glad I have a day job because I wouldn't get hired by Metro Transit to work with great people. Thank you. Oh, Madam Chair Slawik. My boss is here. Anyway, we're going to talk on three things today because Director Thompson is going to bring you up to date on the most important item, which is the regional solicitation changes that we passed at the tab last week. Just as an overview, because it's going to be coming to you, I'm going to go through TAC, scope change, and streamline tip amendments, because you'll be getting elements of this in the on your October 14th, or at your October 14th meeting. The TAC, the Technical Advisory Committee to the tab, is made up of professional staff from those agencies, cities, counties, that plan and implement projects that go through regional solicitation. They're made up of metro cities, engineers, county, Minneapolis and St. Paul each have their city engineer or designate, the Met Council, Metropolitan Airports Commissions, MnDOT, DEED, MPCA, Suburban Transit, Freight, U.S. Department of Transportation has a non-voting position, and is non-motorized as well. Scope change. Scope change is the process through which a regional solicitation approved project is permitted to change. Often between the time the applicant applies and has design to the final details of design, things change, and often benefits can be improved. There are a couple of criteria for a scope change. One, it must have funds, federal funds, from either the regional solicitation or the Highway Safety Improvement Program, HSIP. And the definition of a scope change is any physical change of characteristic, and the project description in the original application is considered the scope for evaluating whether a scope change is necessary. The scope change process is handled through the tab coordinator and either the representative of the Federal Highway Administration or the Federal Transit Administration. There are three types: administrative, informal, and formal. Administrative is changing the amenities and aesthetics, such as adding a noise wall, adding a bench, waste receptacles. Informal, obviously more than the administrative, brings into play such things as combining two tab-funded projects or changing an intersection from a roundabout to signalized. The formal, of course, are much more significant. That would be such as removing a sidewalk or an interchange, pedestrian bridge, reducing transit service, or changing the number of travel lanes. Streamlined TIP, Transportation Improvement Program, must meet for streamlined TIP, which means fast tracking. You're familiar with the TIP amendment process because you've seen them. But the streamlined TIP has to meet three criteria, all three. The federal funds, but not from TAB or the Met Council. The project must be in the TPP and consistent with it, and the project is either not regionally significant or it's regionally significant, but there's no change to the air quality. Regional significance includes these three criteria: adding one or more travel lanes over a mile, adding an interchange, or reconfiguring of an interchange. Examples of items that could be streamlined TIP are congressional earmarks, safe routes to school, or cost increases but do not affect the federal funds participation or the scope. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dugan. Any questions from council members? None? Thank you. All right, we will move on to reports. We've got MTS Director Thompson.
So, Madam Chair and council members, the tab action that Mr. Dugan mentioned is last week they approved the draft regional solicitation to release for public comment. That begins this week. So we're accepting public comments through November 6th on the regional solicitation application and the Highway Safety Improvement Plan application. It was the normal cycle that we have is that we complete the round of regional solicitation, and then we begin the process of saying, what did we learn from this process? What should we make changes for the next application that we have every 2 years? And this time we went through an extensive policymaker process that Member Barber and Cummings were part of, along with TAB members and citizen reps. And so we have, I would say, more major changes this time than in the typical process. But the regional solicitation will be awarding, we're estimating at approximately $180 million in federal funding this round, with projects selected at the end of next year. I thought I'd highlight just a couple of the major changes that are in the draft. And again, we're accepting public comment on the draft. So these are changes that we're looking for public and agency input on. In November, it'll be finalized for completed after the public comment is there. So a few of the major changes. This year, we have said that anybody who wants to apply for federal funds any agency must have a ADA transition plan adopted by their respective agency in order to be eligible for a project application. That includes the council, and the council is on track to have their transition plan approved in the spring, and you'll hear more about that. But that's a major step that TAB said this is important. We want to make sure that everybody is working towards transitioning their infrastructure and policies to be ADA accessible. So that's a requirement. So if a city or county or somebody does not have that plan, they cannot apply for federal funds under this project. So that's new this year. A lot of changes in the transit categories. Where a lot of debate this summer. We've talked about that here a little bit, but first of all, they created an arterial bus transit category, which will the council will submit up to $25 million for one arterial bus rapid transit project. That would be selected through our Network Next process that you've heard a lot about. So that's what's unique about that is that it is outside of the application project. We really had a lot of good discussion about why it made sense in this case for arterial BRT. And so that is a major change in a whole new category this time around. Though arterial BRT had been funded before, it had generally been at the $7 million cap that is the application cap. So with this, we anticipate they could build an entire arterial BRT, a smaller one for this $25 million. They also said that there are other BRT categories that are important in the region, and so the regional solicitation should allow for other BRT, like highway BRT, or improvements to existing BRT, like the Orange Line or Red Line or Gold Line projects as they come forward. And so another additional set, the regional solicitation would allow up to another $7 million for other BRT investments. Created a new guarantee where one new project must serve a new transit market. And so that is a market that doesn't have transit today, that is outside of the urban area. And so we're trying to guarantee new service in new areas, kind of geographic coverage. So that's a new guarantee, up to $4 million for new market guarantee. But of course, somebody has to apply. There has to be an application in a new market. Set aside money this time for unique projects, so that trying to really, and the policy group really wanted to try to encourage innovation. We're at a time where there's a lot of innovation in transportation, and really look forward in transportation. So set aside a small amount of funding or projects for unique projects, not this time, but the next solicitation 2 years from now. They adjusted the amount of money that goes to transit, so rebalanced the roadway, transit, and bicycle and trail area, pedestrian area, to move $5 million more to the transit category. And so that's a fairly major change. We haven't had a kind of a shift among those modes for a while. We've redone the equity scoring, which we've briefed you on before, and we're going to be doing some training for applicants this fall, and so that they change their approach to looking at equity in their applications. Created a new roadway category called Spot Mobility and Safety, which these are intersection improvements that really are things that improve at a very specific point, a small category. This aligns a category with our TPP that we did not necessarily have in the regional solicitation. We anticipate that there'll be lots of projects that apply for these in the roadway category. These could be new intersections, new roundabouts, things that really address a spot location and a safety issue. And then I'll kind of close with the last one, is that there's a lot of discussion about trail projects. Trail projects probably get our most applications for regional trails. And there was discussion about what should be the maximum award for trails. And it had been $5.5 million for maximum award. And the recommendation in the draft is that be lowered to $4 million so that we can award more projects in the trail category. But I would say this is one that had a lot of the debate at TAB, and one that we expect to receive a lot of comments on in the public comment period. So it's an area that that's been kind of what's the maximum we should invest in each trail project has been a point of discussion for the last 3 cycles at least. And so I expect this one we'll get a lot of public comments. So we are encouraging and doing our normal outreach for public comment, but we expect that the agencies that are represented on tab and committees will continue to submit comments, and we hope that the public does too in this process. So again, that I think is posted either today or tomorrow with full application with the changes in detail that I mentioned, and we'll be accepting comments through November 6th, and all that information is on the council's website. The other thing I would like to just briefly update is that we will be hosting our fall convening of the Metro Mobility. We do that twice a year, and some of you have attended the spring convening, and I thought I'd pass out that. It's 4 weeks away. It's on October 29th, but this is an evening. We try to do one during the day in the spring or fall and the other one in the evening. So I'd encourage you, if you are available, to attend. This is a great way to hear from our Metro Mobility customers and their advocates. We usually do a general short presentation about updates, and then we just sit. It's really intended to listen to our customers and hear about how the service is impacting them and where some issues or places we can change and improve the service. And so this one is in Minneapolis and has really good transit access, but we thought having one in the evening might afford some more of our customers a chance to attend this meeting and give input. So I wanted to give you that a heads up, since it's about a month away and it's an evening session. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Director Thompson. Any questions from council members? I have one question and a comment. So my first question is for the ADA transition plan. Is that something that comes through and gets approved, or is it just coming to us as an information item? It's new, so I'm just curious how we'll be doing that.
Madam Chair, I believe we are going to have the council presentations and information items, and I believe there will be an approval of that. I'm not exactly sure the schedule of that, but we will be done before April, because that's when we're required to be done. And it's right now it's out seeking public comment.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of work currently being done to get public input about that plan.
Okay.
So it would be after the new year you'd start to see information about that.
Very good, thank you. And just a comment on the regional solicitation proposal that's out for public comment right now. It was a very diverse work group who worked on that, from people different areas and backgrounds, and I really think it was a true result of great compromise amongst a lot of different parties with different visions, but we came up with something that I think is really, really positive for the region. I want to take a moment to thank some of our staff members, definitely Director Thompson, General Manager Koistra, but also Amy Benowitz, Cole Henniker, and Steve Peterson. Also a mention to Adam Harrington and Charles Carlson, who are all very, very helpful in the process and the discussion and ultimately the final result. So with that, any other questions from council members? All right, then we will turn to General Manager Koistra.
Thank you, Chair. I want to first talk a little bit about state fair outcomes. We talked about that a little bit the other day, and as you know, it's a lot of, it takes a tremendous amount of effort at Metro Transit in both planning and execution to provide the state fair service. And so this year we had particular challenges because we were losing 3 of our parking lots due to, one was due to construction, others were due to development. And so we were dealing with less parking lots, and still we provided with less parking lots and increasing our fee from $5 to $6, which was required to get a return on the cost of the service. We still had more rides this year than we did last year. We had 598,000 rides for state fair service rides from our agency alone. Overall, our efficiency was increased by 17%. As you would imagine, if we had less parking lots to go to, or parking locations to go to, we had less service hours, and that means we had more rides per service hour. And so all our parking lots, maybe with 1 or 2 exceptions, did really well in terms of state fair service. The state fair has said that 46% of all attendees at the state fair rode transit to the state fair. That's just not our service. That includes suburban transit provider service, private operated shuttles, Metro Mobility, and then of course our own service. But 46% of all state fair attendees rode transit of some form. I might mention that Councilmember Cummings had asked how much our app was being used this year, and 17% of the tickets we sold through our app. That's actually a good figure because last year was 8%, so we've more than doubled app use. And there were some incentives to use the app because you can bring your cost down from 6 to 5. I visited a number of the park and rides just during the State Fair service, and they absolutely were happy to have transit service there. Even those that, when I was at Mall of America area, 28th Street, they were wrapped around a fence, and it was a long wait. And I asked at the front of the line, not the end of the line, how long you've been waiting, and they said about a little over a half hour. But they said it's worth it, and so they appreciate the service. And it's true that people going to the State Fair are really happy to be going, and they're really happy to have our service. And many told me actually about how they tried it the other way and it didn't work at all for them. They would end up riding around for an hour and parking a mile away. So it's a great service to provide. We tried to get our costs paid for through our fees, and I haven't got the final numbers on cost and revenues, but it was a very good year for us, and I really want to thank the staff of Metro Transit because it's a real team effort from facilities to operations to planning across the board. It's a big deal. I want to also mention that our ridership in August was a big month for ridership in August. We have a lot going on with the State Fair and Target Field and U.S. Bank Stadium. Alliance Field helps the Twins are winning, but I don't think that's the only reason we had a good month. Metro Green Line, Metro Blue Line, North Star Commuter Rail each had their highest August ever. I know that A-Line had its highest total monthly ridership ever with more than 131,000 rides. So we are still seeing that pattern of premium services that provide fast, reliable, less stops are really drawing ridership, and that's true. We're seeing that C-Line ridership has been good. We've seen it in A-Line, Green Line, and Blue Line, and it's been a pattern that persists, even despite, I will say, the success of our teams, the United and the Twins. We were seeing growth in ridership on the light rail lines and A lines even before those seasons started or before those teams proved themselves to be worthy of the show. So it's a good pattern to see, and I think it says something about our approach to transit growth being focused on some of those premium services in those high use corridors. We'll continue to grow ridership in those corridors. Last thing I wanted to follow up on is the Augsburg student pass. We had talked about that last time. There were some questions from Councilmember Fredson. He's not here today. Maybe I'll cover that in a future meeting because it was mostly his questions that I was responding
That'd be
to.
great.
So I'll wait for a future meeting for that. So I'll leave my report at that then, Council.
All right. Thank you, General Manager. Are there any questions? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now that you have the numbers from this year's fair ridership, at what point do you start looking at tweaking next year's ridership as far as changing hours or lots or fare tweak or any other kind of tweaks that you
Well, the cruel story is that we're already starting to plan for next year's state fair. Brian Funk, our deputy operator, told me that they start about the day after the state fair service ends. I know we've been asked from some local elected officials to talk about what they can expect in terms of fair service, so we're going to be having those meetings. But I don't think we're yet at the stage of tweaking exactly the hours and where and those sorts of issues. But I know it's of strong interest to local areas how we put that service together. So we'll be getting to that, and we're getting inquiries for external coming in about how things went and what to expect for next year.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you. Different question. How are we doing on number of drivers? Are we still down significantly?
The last I heard was 90 drivers short. I'm going to see if we have an update on that. I'm looking at Brian Funk, who's in the...
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Councilmember Cummings. tally as of this morning is minus 86.86. So we're kind of treading water right now. We've had several classes of about 12 people starting, which is a good number. Today we had 6, and so we're managing that. We've seen a nice little uptick the last couple weeks in incoming applications. So we're processing folks through the pipeline and hope to continue to make up ground.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions from council members? Someone for Mr. DeGan?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to add my compliments to General Manager Koistra. I use the app. As a personal experience, I used the app, so I saved $1. I went to the Burnsville Park and Ride, so I rode in on Suburban Transit, which is well coordinated with your agency. I was there at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. We had to use the overflow lot because the main lot was filled. And at the end, getting back on, the staff went out of their way to help a significantly elderly couple get to the front of the line. They had to sit on a bench under in the shade, and so when everybody queued up, they were at the end, but the people came back, and your people, or the MBTA people came back, got the elderly couple, took them to the front of the line, and got them on the bus. So it's very nicely done.
Madam Chair, that's always great to hear. I love positive personal testimonies.
I couldn't agree more. All right, any other questions? All right, if not, we'll move on to business. We have no consent items tonight, and per the amended agenda, our first item of tonight is 2019-246 Type 1 Light Rail Vehicle Automatic Couplers, and we have Chris Royston.
Welcome. Madam Chair, again, my name is Chris Royston. I'm Manager of Overhaul and Special Projects. The proposed action is for the Met Council to approve the purchase of 54 couplers for our Bombardier, also known as Type 1 LRVs. This picture here shows an LRV with the coupler, one with the coupler removed, and then for ease of conversation, a diagram with the parts identified. The purpose of the couplers is to provide a mechanical and electrical connection for the trains. The draft gear, if you can see on that picture there, will be of importance and part of our conversation. On the mechanical coupler faceplate, if you look at that, you'll see that there is a funnel and what's called a cone. And the way they work with each train, when the trains come into contact with one another, the funnel receives the corresponding cone of the other train. At that point in time, they make a physical coupling. After that coupling is made, the electrical heads, which are on either side of the coupler faceplate, they engage and they provide the electrical connection. And then from there, the trains are able to talk to one another, and the operator is able to control from the cab the train. In addition to being serviced on a regular basis, the couplers are also part of the overhaul program. Being original to the LRVs, they are surpassing 15 years of service and 1 million miles. So with that in mind, we sent out 2 couplers for assessment to develop a scope of work to move forward with the overhaul. And based on that assessment, we determined that the overhaul would require us to replace all of the draft gear and would not be cost feasible to overhaul. So the determination was made it would be better to purchase brand new couplers. With that, can I take any questions?
Any questions for the presenter? All right, if not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the business item.
So moved, Chair.
The motion, is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. We are on to our next business item, which is item 2019-248, which is the same week item, the 2020 to 2023 Transportation Improvement Program. And we have Joe Barbeau here. Oh, don't have Joe. Heidi, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Just waiting for your slides to get up so you can see those. Good evening. My name is Heidi Schallberg. I'm a senior planner in MTS, and I'm here pinch hitting for Joe Barbeau tonight, who is on vacation. So previous to Joe starting at the council doing the TIP, I previously managed the TIP and am familiar with the process. So we'll try to answer any questions that you may have. Do you all have the slides on your iPad? Should I go ahead without the slides? Okay. So I know Joe was here at your June meeting with a preview of the draft tip, so some of this may be a little bit familiar to you from that presentation. The tip is a transportation improvement program. We commonly refer to it by its acronym. And the purpose of it is to provide a list of projects in the region for transportation that receive federal transportation funding or are important to air quality, may affect air quality regardless of the funding source. So this is one of our core required products for the Metropolitan Planning Organization. And it covers a 4-year period and is prioritized by year and is also incorporated into MnDOT's statewide TIP or STIP as they refer to. And we work very closely with MnDOT on this process. There are 4 federal requirements as far as approval of the TIP and any amendments to it. The first is that it must be fiscally balanced, so it's not a fiscal wish list. The funds must be reasonably expected to be available for these projects in the time frame identified. It must be consistent with the region's transportation plan. We call it the Transportation Policy Plan in this region. It must meet air quality requirements and also provide an opportunity for public input. And so for this tip, we had a 45-day comment period, and it included social media, and first time that we did a pop-up meeting for the tip. Now, the projects themselves are selected through different processes, kind of 3 main processes that are used to identify the projects that you see included in the tip. Of course, the first one is the one that you'll hear a lot about with the regional solicitation that comes through TAB and the council. This also includes a pot of federal money for a highway safety improvement program that MnDOT partners with the council on. Kind of the second main area is MnDOT itself, as state DOT also has access to different federal funds for projects in addition to state-only projects. And so they have their own processes as well to identify their projects that are included in the TIP. And then we have Federal Transit Administration funds that go by formula to the region's transit providers. And so that goes through different processes as well as any competitive transit funding. The schedule for the tip, this just kind of shows you where we are. Joe was here in your June meeting, and that was released for public comment about mid-June. We had public comment through early August on the 9th. TAB did review those comments and approve the tip at its August meeting. And so we're here today asking for your concurrence, or recommend to the council that they concur with the TAB's action to approve the tip. This would then be forwarded on to the council, or to MnDOT, for inclusion into the statewide TIP, and then we typically receive federal approvals by the end of the calendar year or early in the following calendar year. Just have 2 very brief slides just to kind of give you an overview of the scale of the funding that's included in the TIP. This TIP for the 4-year period includes $5.3 billion of funding. So that includes approximately $1.4 billion of funds that come through the Federal Highway Administration, approximately $1.3 billion of funds that come through the Federal Transit Administration. The largest group is $2.1 billion that includes property tax and state taxes, and then trunk highway funds make up about $476 million of funds. And then last, just to give you an idea of how this breaks out by mode, these are just primary modes. So we have amounts and percentages. I do want to note for the highways and roads, this often does include accommodations for other modes such as bicycles and pedestrians. Those are harder to break out, so they're just kind of focused on the primary mode. And so for primarily highway and road funding, we have $2.3 billion. It's a little over 44% of the funds represented in the TIP. Standalone bicycle or pedestrian projects that are just independent of any other work that's done, so it's a smaller amount, is approximately 2.3% of the TIP with $123 million. But again, as mentioned, as you see through the regional solicitation, a lot of times those projects are also done in conjunction with road work. The transit and travel demand management grouping is a little bit higher this year, approximately 47% or $2.5 billion of the overall funds. And then we have a category for other or set-asides. This is about 6.5% of the funds. This can include work such as right-of-way acquisition or environmental work, or set-asides that most commonly MnDOT might have for funds that would be identified in the future. Is what we had for an overview of the TIP. I would be happy to attempt to answer any questions you might have. Otherwise, we'd be looking for the committee to recommend that the council concurs with the TAB action. And there's also, if you'll notice in your business item, kind of a long list of things that the council is certifying as well when we submit this to MnDOT and to USDOT.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the presenter? All right, if not, I would entertain a motion to approve the business item.
So moved.
Motion, and is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Thank you, Heidi. Next, we are on to business item 2019-249, which is also a same week item. It's the 2020 Unified Planning Work Program, UPWP. We have Amy Venowitz and Dave Burns.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is David Burns. I'm a senior highway planner in MTS Planning. I'm going to talk to you briefly about the Unified Planning Work Program, commonly known as the UPWP, which is a document that actually has a name that describes what it is very well. This is a document that is required by federal law for all MPOs, Metropolitan planning organizations within the country. Its purpose is ultimately to ensure a continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive, also known as the 3C process, to transportation planning needs within the Twin Cities metro area. So it serves to outline all of our MPO work activities that we will perform in the upcoming year, which is 2020. And it actually serves as an application we must submit in order to receive federal planning funds. It's required by the FHWA and FTA in order to receive these federal planning funds, which I will refer to as CPG, Consolidated Planning Grant Funds. All federal funds, just a note here, require at least a 20% local match. And once approved, it is submitted to MnDOT and FHWA and FTA for review and their concurrence approval. So the UPWP describes our transportation planning budget, the activities and studies. These studies and activities stem from the goals and objectives in our 2040 Transportation Policy Plan. Not only that, they address some of the pressing issues and concerns expressed by our local planning partners over the last few months to few years. So we do list the funding source for each task. And some of the participants that we include in developing this document include not only the Met Council, but MnDOT, our transit providers, the MPCA, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and MAC, the Airports Commission. So the UPWP is broken down into 6 major work categories. You can see them up there. In the budget, each category includes a calculation of the total staff time and associated cost, the consultant time and cost if applicable, estimated expenditures, and total cost for projects within that category. So just a note, some tasks are sort of part of the everyday, reoccurring planning process and repeated year after year, whereas other tasks are based upon regional needs. They might be studies, and they help address priorities and needs outlined in our transportation, our TPP. So I'll just briefly go over some of these tasks. In task A, A1 includes the planning and administrative activities that support the MPO functions of the council. So this includes support of the TAC and the TAB, preparation of the UPWP, this document, the functional class change requests that come from locals, progress reports to MnDOT and FHWA, and some other planning activities. A2 is the development of the TIP, which was just presented by Heidi as a federally required document. It includes coordination, the public comment process, and the amendments that come through over the course of any given year. A3 is activities that cover the regional solicitation. So it's the development of funding scenarios, the development of scoring criteria and weighting, and includes a selection of projects and a review of the performance of completed projects as well. Modal systems planning is our big is budget category, which makes a lot of sense. So B1 is highway systems planning. It includes work that informs highway investment decisions. B2 is freight planning, and that involves participation of the regional freight planning program, includes stuff like coordination with the Minnesota Freight Advisory Council and freight performance measures and data needs. Transit planning, B3 includes work with Metro Transit and the suburban transit providers to plan a regional transit system, which is really consistent with the vision that we outline in our TPP. B4 is bike and ped planning, and this is providing technical support to participate with partners on non-motorized planning activities throughout the region. And B5 is participation in major corridor studies that we are not leading, but we're working with our regional partners on to ensure the policies outlined in our TPP are implemented effectively. Moving on to long-range systems planning, C1 involves coordination with MnDOT and stakeholders on TPP investment changes, amendments, and modifications as necessary, and really to ensure the goals of the 2040 TPP are reflected in our activities regionally. Land use planning is ensuring that the development activities within the region are supported by and consistent with council policies and regional goals. And a lot of this includes the review of the transportation component of the comprehensive plans. C3, environmental justice, very important topic. This ensures our planning activities address the needs of people who have historically been underrepresented. This includes people of color, low-income individuals, and people with disabilities. Again, a very important part of our planning process. C4 are activities required by the federal government to ensure our transportation planning process supports the Clean Air Act. C5, transportation finance, tracks and coordinates estimates of projected revenues and expenditures for the highway and transit systems of the region. And C6, automated, connected, and electric vehicles. Obviously, this is a fairly new activity, but it's an increasingly important one, and it works to support research and collaboration with other regional partners, especially MnDOT, on CAV technologies and how they may impact the regional transportation system in the future. Task D is our travel forecasting and model development. So D1 represents activities that support the travel behavior inventory. Some examples of this include travel behavior, travel research and behavior. This forms the basis of the regional travel demand model. It includes the performance of data analysis on regional travel patterns and the distribution of TBI data to our partners. B2 includes the maintenance and maintaining and applying travel forecast models to support planning and operation of transportation facilities, providing projections of travel demand, emissions, and transit ridership, and the production of socioeconomic forecasts to populate and develop the travel demand model, ultimately so we know where people are going to live and work and can plan a transportation system that adequately serves and addresses their needs. So E is short-range planning and performance monitoring activities. It includes the congestion management process. That includes identifying causes of congestion, implementation of strategies to help mitigate congestion, and the coordination of data collection throughout the metro area to help in this endeavor. E2 is the development, maintenance, and dissemination of information on the performance of the Twin Cities transportation system. So it includes the development and adoption of federally required performance measures and targets, and ultimately the development of a performance dashboard, which will be something we will be focusing on in 2020. Finally, we have non-CPG or non-federal planning grant planning activities. They are part of our work program, but not eligible for federal transportation planning funds. So the first is the right-of-way loan or right-of-way acquisition loan fund. It's a program that gives loans to cities and counties for advanced acquisition of property located within an officially mapped metropolitan highway right-of-way. So it's basically just a little budget item with staff time spent determining the eligibility of specific parcels for REL funding. And F2, aviation planning is actually not covered by federal transportation planning funds. So we use local funds provided by MAC to provide aviation planning support. And this really helps to ensure the long-term viability of the regional aviation system and addresses land use planning, development, system efficiency, and project effectiveness. All right. So here we kind of have a breakout of the budget. The actual budget is on page 30 if you happen to have the draft UPWP in front of you. So the first thing to look at here is the budget uses staff weeks, which we define as 40 hours within each project category to determine the cost of salary. Next, we add in the consultant costs if applicable, and overhead and expenses are then determined. The total cost of each project category is calculated. I can't see it super well, and I apologize for that, but again, our largest category is modal systems planning. So our federal award, our CPG grant in 2020 will be $4.8 million. The 20% required local match of that 4.8 million is 1.2 million, and that gives us a total of about $6 million. However, we have a very ambitious work program. We have committed an additional 1.2 million of council funds to cover the cost of the 2020 work program. With this overmatch, as we refer to it, the total budget for 2020 is $7.3 million. And I'm just going to really briefly talk about, we have a lot of consultant planning studies planned for 2020. A couple highway ones are the roadway right-sizing study and the Twin Cities Mobility Needs Analysis. This mobility needs analysis will provide MnDOT with a monetary value for mobility needs to be incorporated into the next MnSHIP update, which is going to be very important. We have a couple of non-motorized studies, the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan and the Regional Bike Transportation Network Facility and Corridor Spacing Guidelines. Then we're doing some stuff on literature scan on connected and automated vehicles. And a to-be-determined peer region research and literature scan. In addition, we're doing some additional work on the congestion management process plan and putting together a transportation system dashboard. And that's really going to be used to communicate to the public and our stakeholders the state of the system. There's also a number of travel model development and forecasting activities. A lot of these are software purchases. A couple that I do want to point out is the research collaboration with the University of Minnesota. We'll be working with them on Transitway Impact Research Program and the Accessibility Observatory Pooled Fund and Local Analysis. So we're going to be continuing our standing relationship and close relationship with these research activities with the University of Minnesota. With that, the proposed action is to adopt the proposed 2020 UPWP and the budget of $7.286 million, adopt the attached resolution, which is 2019-2022, authorizing the filing of an application with MnDOT for the planning grant under the FAST Act, and authorize the regional administrator to enter into agreement with the state of Minnesota, the DOT, for distribution of FHWA and FTA planning funds. And be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. Any questions for the presenter? Councilmember Chambliss.
Yes, I really support planning and making sure that we're doing this in a responsible manner. The issue that I have with this budget is related to item D, the research and travel forecasting. My understanding is that includes some forecasting that tracks cell phones patterns. Is that correct?
Director Thompson.
Madam Chair, Councilmember, we have a license that we use with a company called a Streetlight that we'll be executing starting in October, and that does allow us to purchase anonymous data from electronic devices. It could be in-vehicle devices or a cell phone. We do never know which device it is, but it's also a company that we've been currently. I think this would be our third year of use of that data for transportation. If there's a particular point about the data, that's one of our data sources that goes into our analysis. We have multiple other sources like travel surveys that we're doing surveys, either that customers use a cell phone to enter the data, they agree to do that, or they do a paper survey or other types of data. So it depends on the specific, but we are buying data that's from electronic devices.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. So I understand that that data is anonymous, but I do believe that information is used from census data, which can be tracked at the block level. And those blocks can be racially identified. I have seen that data, I have used that data, and you can, for example, determine, the demographics of each block. And I also understand from our earlier presentations that even though you cannot identify a cell phone that belongs to a person, that cell phone usage is tracked from different locations. For me, I just have a hard time with that, and it feels somewhat an invasion of privacy. Even if you don't have the name of the cell phone user, you can identify that block, and even if that information is not published, nowadays, there's just so much tracking of our faces, of, cameras everywhere. And at some point, I think we need to relook at that. And I do understand that it comes at a cost. Those studies can be from somewhere around $300,000 to $500,000. And, the purpose being to identify what our customers' needs are. And sometimes there are better ways to do that, I think. So I personally am going to have a hard time approving this for that reason.
Madam Chair, if I might just interject for a second. So what's actually going on is they don't look at it at quite the block level. It's a larger level of geography, and it's based upon the American Community Survey data, which is published by the U.S. Census Bureau. And they look at the proportion of the cell phones coming from that particular census tract, and they look at the demographics of that census tract, and they approximate the number of people traveling that might be of a particular demographic from that census tract to, for example, another census tract. So it's really, it's based upon data from the U.S. Census Bureau, and it's anonymized, and it's I'm probably not the best person to explain their privacy methods, but I can assure you that it is very much data that you cannot specifically pinpoint where people come from. If that
Thank you,
makes sense.
Director Thompson.
Madam Chair and Councilmember, we'd be happy to work through with you and go through the analysis we did to determine that, at the staff level at least, that we're comfortable with the data, but it can get into detail. But this is actually, we're buying public data that is being used and purchased by all parties. This is the questions that you have raised are ones that we definitely thought carefully through as we went through this decision, but we'd be happy to work through in detail, if you would like, the privacy protections that are on this data as we move forward. It's been a very valuable data source to our planning efforts. It does allow us new insights that we have not had before, but definitely understand your concerns with this, with the general data in general that is available.
I think we can probably arrange for one-on-one sessions where you can walk through the data and how it's used. I will say for some of the projects that are going on even out in the counties that I represent, it's been very beneficial and actually a really cost-effective tool for them to use to be able to really model why there's a need for investment in certain corridors. And so we could bring some of those examples so you can see how people are actually using the data as they're submitting applications and things for federal funding, if that would help.
I would appreciate further discussion.
We can definitely do that. Is there any other discussion? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this plan is contingent upon receiving these funds, correct? And I'm wondering when you get confirmation of the funds available.
So we know the exact, Madam Chair, we know the exact amount we will be getting in federal transportation funds. We just have to have this approved and the memorandum signed and submitted to MnDOT prior to the end of September. So that's all there is in the process. We basically just need a signature and we're good to go.
Great, thank you.
All right, any other questions from council members? Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a quick question on tax, excuse me, C3, Environmental Justice and Equity. And I'm looking at the UPWP description of the activities that were engaged by the folks in planning, and I'm trying to find out the role of the Council's Equity Advisory Committee in providing information for this particular task. Do you have any information of whether the EAC was involved and in what capacity?
Madam Chair, I don't have any information available right now on that, but I would be happy to get back to you with that information ASAP and let you know the process that we undertook.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from council members? All right, if not, I would entertain a motion to approve the business item.
So moved.
Motion, sir, second.
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Opposed?
Motion carries. Next, we are on to business item number 2019-213. We have Robert Rinstead from Metro Transit, Jody Jacoby from Procurement, and Daniel Abelson from the General Counsel's Office. We have an expanded group here to present today because, as you know, there is no opposition to this award. Another bidder, AP Midwest LLC, filed a lawsuit against the council in Ramsey County District Court on September 18, 2019. And if required, what we will do today, if it gets to a type of discussion that is warranted, we will close the meeting to address attorney-client privilege matters. Just note that the action that we actually take today moves this item to the full council, which will see this item on October 9th. So with that, I will turn it over to Robert Rimstead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Chair and Council members, I'm Robert Rimstead with Metro Transit Engineering Facilities. I'm going to give a quick overview and information about the project, and then I'll let Jody Jacoby talk about a little bit about the procurement process, and then Dan Abelson will be able to present a little bit of information about the known opposition to the award. So this presentation is to present the recommendation of the contract to construct the Minneapolis bus garage. As a quick overview, I previously had presented information with the business item 2019-205 that approved the funding toward the contract. I went over the need and some of the fleet growth projections for the bus garage. But it's an existing 11-acre site that we own adjacent to our existing Haywood garage just west of downtown Minneapolis. It's a very good central location. It's efficient to operate our service out of and reduce the amount of deadhead and hours the drivers operate the buses without any passengers on them. The garage's basic functions is that a lot of back of house functions, staff check-in, dispatching the buses, changing the oil and tires, fueling the buses, washing them, cleaning them every night. And so with the upcoming projected growth in the fleet and the overage capacity of our existing garages, we need this expansion to proceed. So here, I guess I'm going to have a couple plans come out is the existing Haywood office and police facility, the existing Haywood garage, and then this is the location of the new Minneapolis bus garage. So looking at it through the Thrive level, the Thrive lens analysis, this project does support the sustainability and stewardship by providing that the infrastructure to support the electric bus fleet. And so in the base bid of the project, we are bringing in electrical service to support up to 100 electric buses and the chargers when the funding and those decisions are made to purchase those buses. On the south side, there's a solar thermal wall that will help preheat some of the outdoor air in the wintertime to help reduce our heating load by about 10%. The rooftop does collect the rainwater that does fall upon it and runs it through a cleaning system to be able to use that in the bus wash, which will reduce the water consumption of the bus wash by about 34% annually. It's one of our most energy efficient buildings in the energy models. It's coming in less than 50 kBtu per square foot per year, which is kind of a similar measure to miles per gallon of a bus. The lower the number, the better. Most of our existing 5 garages operate around 80 to 85. And so this is a big improvement to that. The roof has been structured for a future rooftop solar array to be able to be placed up on there. The size of the rooftop array could go up to 2 megawatts. It also supports equity and livability by being able to expand our maintenance technician training program to have just more people be able to come to the agency with the jobs that this facility will provide. And then it also supports that overall service expansion. And so with the new transit developments that are being discussed and presented by our agency, I mean, this supports the C line, the D line, the D line, the orange line, the gold line. It really just supports the additional capacity needed for a lot of those routes. And so an example of the C line is, a lot of that service is currently operated by 40-foot buses, but now that we've gone to 60-foot buses, that bus takes 1.5 times the space of a 40-foot bus. And so we can't just keep adding more buses or changing from 40s to 60-foot buses. We just need space to be able to park those buses and maintain those. And so here's a quick rendering, and this will just kind of orient you to the site. Here's Oak Lake Lane and 10th Avenue North, just kind of in between the new garage and our existing facilities. There's the main entrance to the building. That a lot of the main entrances are adjacent to each other to really have a more synergy between the facilities. Our transit control center is just right across the street. Staff parking is at the lower level, and it's open air parking just tucked below the building. The soils were poor on the site, so we ended up having to build a structured floor to support the buses. So we ended up pushing that up higher to allow better access off of 11th Avenue North, which allows quicker access to Interstate 94 and some of those other major roads to get the buses to where they need to go as quickly as possible. Again, the bus parking, the storage, and the maintenance functions are up all on that second level. That main entrance and exit is back off of 11th Avenue towards Lindale Avenue North. Bus maintenance is on the second level facing the south side. We're trying to take advantage of some daylighting opportunities in there to get some additional daylight in for the staff that work there 24 hours a day. And the rooftop again for that future solar array. So this project has been a long time in coming. I think it showed up in some of our very early planning documents as early as 2000. I think our first request for some state funds was back in 2002. We made numerous requests throughout the years. We did the land purchase in 2006. Then purchased an additional 2 acres in 2016, realizing that this is kind of a once in a 2-decade opportunity to build a facility. So we wanted to make sure that we right size it for that potential fleet growth. So here we are today, and towards the end of 2019, the construction documents have completely bidded the project, and now we're getting ready to move ahead with the award of the construction contract and start that process and hopefully finish in 2022. So the overall total budget and funding for the project is on the left-hand side is where the money is being spent for the project. The right-hand side is where the funding is coming from. We have received 2 competitive awards to help support this project, recognizing it's a good project to move forward with. So far to date, we've spent about $19 million between the land acquisition, building demolition, staff time, design contracts, et cetera, to continue the process forward. And so again, business item 2019-205 authorized the funding to be able to award this construction contract. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jody to talk about the bidding.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Jody Jacoby, and I'm the Director of the Procurement Department, here to share with you a little bit of information about the procurement process. This project was advertised on May 29th, and included as part of the project was a 15% disadvantaged business enterprise, otherwise known as DBE goal. And it was established by the Office of Equal Opportunity based on the type of work and the number of DBE contractors in those classification types. This project had 55 different plan holders or unique document holders that went to our website and downloaded the project. It consisted of contractors, suppliers, and plan routes. And downloading the document allows you to automatically receive any project updates. And on this specific project, there were 4 addendums issued. So they were pushed automatically to those 55 plan holders. On June 11th, procurement facilitated a pre-bid meeting to help the contractors better understand the procurement process and the forms. And this meeting is held in partnership with the Office of Equal Opportunity and Robert Rimstead, who's the project manager, again, to help the contractors and the DBEs better understand the details of the project so that they can be responsive and responsible. And there were 94 individuals who attended the pre-bid meeting, so very strong attendance. And then following the pre-bid meeting, the Office of Equal Opportunity facilitated a meet and greet event where they had prime contractors and then potential DBE subcontractors that they paired up to help facilitate some business partnerships. And in fact, this was the second meet and greet that the Office of Equal Opportunity facilitated this year. The one following the pre-bid meeting was specific to this project, but they also facilitated one in January with all the upcoming projects throughout the year for Metro Transit to give the primes and the DBEs a look ahead of opportunities forthcoming. Again, there were a total of 4 addenda issued on this project, and the time between the advertisement and the publicly held bid opening was 43 days. The publicly held bid opening was on July 11th, where 5 bids were received and opened.
Mr. Abelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. I'm Dan Abelson. I'm an Associate General Counsel in our Office of General Counsel. I just wanted to give you a little bit background on the litigation filed by AP Midwest and to sort of reiterate what the chair said about what you're being asked to decide today. So AP Midwest LLC filed a lawsuit against the council in this case. They're challenging the decision that AP Midwest did not make good faith efforts to meet the DBE goal. Case. This committee is not being asked to weigh in on the litigation or whether AP Midwest made good faith efforts. You're being asked to recommend the award of the contract to Knudsen, which is a preliminary step in the process. Right now, we are working with the court. We had a conference call earlier today to schedule a hearing in this matter. And the intent, and it's possible that there may not be a decision before October 9th. We learned that from the call with the court today. But the plan would be not to ask the council to award the contract until we have the benefit of the court's decision on AP Midwest motion for temporary restraining order, which means that AP Midwest is asking the court to stop the award of this contract.
So with that, the proposed action, the business item, is to advance again the authorization of the award and execution of the contract 19P000 with Knutson Construction in the amount of $114 million for the construction of the Minneapolis garage. And so with that, we'll take any questions.
Great, thank you all. Questions for the presenters? Councilmember Sterner.
Thank you, Chair. Just had a question. When is the solar array scheduled to be put on the building? And is that awarded with a contract? And if so, what's the cost of that as well?
Madam Chair and council members, that the solar array is not part of the base bid of the contract. We were not able to squeeze that into the base budget, but there are some, as we look ahead to the future, we recognize that the best time to put a solar array on a facility is when it has a brand new roof, so that we get the full life of that solar array and the full life of the roof concurrently. And so we're looking at assembling the funding to be able to do that, and hopefully we'll be able to do that while it's under construction. We anticipate the construction period to be about 28 months, and so we're hopeful that we'll be able to find funding with, with the within the capital improvement program or the CIP budget to be able to help fund that array with some of the other items that we applied for a NOLO grant to help support the electric bus fleet as well. So there's a combination of solar array, battery storage, and electric bus chargers that are part of that application that we made. Now we're just trying to assemble the full funding package for that system.
Okay, thank you very much.
Additional questions from council members? If not, then I'd entertain a motion to approve the business item.
So moved.
A motion, is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Opposed.
And the motion carries. Thank you all. All right, we are done with business items. So tonight we have 4 items. I would say 3, 2 are same week, so they will be on Wednesday's full non-consent agenda. The other item, the one that we just discussed, will go on non-consent to council, hopefully October 9th, pending what we hear back. And 2019-246 can go on consent. Does everyone agree to that? All right, very good. Then we are on to information. We have the E-line staff recommendation alignment. We have Kyle O'Donnell Burrows.
Good afternoon, Chair Barber and committee members. I'm Katie Roth. I'm the manager of Arterial BRT, and I just wanted to introduce today's item by saying that you may recall in May, I last presented an update on the E-line project at the Committee of the Whole. The E-line is our planned 5th Arterial BRT corridor that we are advancing through planning right now toward planned operations in 2024 pending full funding for the project. And so at that time, there were a number of alternatives under consideration, and Kyle O'Donnell Burrows, who is the senior planner in BRT projects leading the planning on this project, will provide you an update on where we are at today, which is having made some progress in that process.
Thank you, Katie. As Katie noted, my name is Kyle O'Donnell Burrows. I'm a planner with the BRT Projects Office at Metro Transit. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and council members. Thank you for having me here today. So as Katie noted, we are here to share the recommended alignment for the E-line. We've known the E-line alignment, the core of the E-line alignment between downtown Minneapolis and Lake Street for some time. But we had been looking to identify potential alternatives for on both the north end of the alignment and the south end of the alignment, looking at covering additional segments of the Route 6, which is the route that the E-line is slated to substantially upgrade. As Katie noted, you previously received an update sharing the recommendation to go across the river on the north end of the alignment to serve 4th and University. And the basis for that recommendation made earlier in this process was based on the high ridership in that segment of the route, as well as serving major regional destinations, including the University of Minnesota and commercial nodes along that segment of the corridor. On the south end, we had looked at 7 potential alternatives, reflecting a little bit more of the complicated route structure of the Route 6. looking at potentially extending over to the Westlake Street station on the Green Line extension, as well as several alternatives farther south, and some of them ending short of the full corridor at about 50th Street and either France or Xerxes Avenue, and others extending all the way down to Southdale Transit Center, which is a major transfer point and destination, and where several of the branches of Route 6 come together. We narrowed those southern alternatives down to 3 advanced alternatives, based again on kind of the structure of the route, as well of the Route 6, as well as population, employment, and ridership in this segment of the Route 6, and also wanting to extend down to Southdale Transit Center, which, as I mentioned, is a major transfer point. Of these 3 initial advanced alternatives for further consideration, we dropped alternative 4, which is the alternative there in yellow that runs on Xerxes Avenue across by 50th Street and then down on France Avenue to 44th Street fairly early in that advanced consideration process. And the rationale for that was it was really difficult to design a connecting bus service plan around that wouldn't result in covering major commercial nodes at 44th and France with some kind of a shuttle service as opposed to a higher level of service that we want to provide at that node. So really that left us with selecting between alternatives 5 and alternative 6. Alternative 5 is, as you can see in sort of the teal there, running along 44th Street over to France Avenue and then down to Southdale Transit Center. And alternative 6 is running diverges at about 44th and Xerxes there and continues down on Xerxes to Southdale Transit Center. So our recommended, this slide really kind of captures the full recommendation, but our recommended alignment is to advance the 44th Street to France Avenue recommendation. Going through the rest of these elements of the slide, we talked a little bit about the recommendation on the northern terminal to serve 4th and University. We are still working through the final determination of how far along 4th and University to serve, either to Stadium Village Station or to Westgate Station on the Green Line. And that in large part is based on doing some additional work to identify our needs for supporting facilities there and the availability of opportunities to put in some support facilities in that section. As I mentioned, then the southern terminal would be Southdale Transit Center for the E-Line and the alignment by 44th Street to France Avenue. The service mix, so the E-Line would run similar to the other arterial BRT corridors in operation approximately every 10 minutes for most of the day, and then tapering off into the late evening, going down to potentially 20 to every 30 minutes. And then the Route 6 would be simplified to follow one pattern as opposed to the multiple patterns it currently does today, running from downtown Minneapolis to Minnesota Drive via Xerxes Avenue and following along through Hennepin Avenue there. And it would run approximately every 20 minutes, again, for most of the day. And that 20-minute service is currently what's available right now on both Xerxes Avenue and most of France Avenue on the Route 6 today. So it would retain the same level of service that folks are experiencing today in that segment. So the real supporting rationale for this recommendation is that there is, when you get down to the more advanced analysis, little significant difference between the overall comparative qualitative metrics that we're looking at between France Avenue and Xerxes Avenue in this section. So looking at the overall benefit or impact to existing Route 6 riders, a similar percentage of Route 6 riders would be benefited by either alternative. Similar story with both population and jobs served, and then benefits to population of concern. The key differentiator between these two alternatives on France Avenue and Xerxes Avenue is access to key regional destinations. So the France Avenue alignment, as we'll note in future slides, serves the major commercial nodes at 44th in France, as well as 50th in France, and then critically serves a major destination at Fairview Southdale Regional Hospital campus. So with significant benefit to providing access to the services provided at that destination, as well as to the folks who work at that organization or at that destination. We're still developing the final cost estimates for capital and operating plans, but preliminary evaluation shows comparable resource and capital requirements between both of these alignments. And then finally, this rationale aligns is consistent with the public feedback we've received so far at our outreach and engagement efforts. So I just wanted to quickly bounce through some of the documentation maps here, showing the differences between these corridors and really the similarities between these corridors. The map on the left here shows ridership on the Route 6 on the corridor level, and then zoomed in to the map on the right that you see on the area here of selection between France Avenue and Xerxes Avenue. And essentially the same same percentage of Route 6 riders today are served both at the station and then within a short walk of the stations for each of these alternatives. One thing to note is that for the recommended alternative that we're recommending on France Avenue, with the Route 6 being simplified to run every 20 minutes on Xerxes Avenue, there are portions of the Route 6 that today do have service that will not under our recommendation. But the ridership on these segments is relatively low. So on Wooddale Avenue segment, there's approximately 18 rides per day. And then on the segment between France Avenue and 39th and 39th Street itself over, there is approximately 60 rides per day in that segment, which in the overall ridership of the Route 6 is approximately 8,000 rides per day, is a relatively small percentage of the overall ridership that would be impacted by this decision. This is the plan that we're going out with today, but there's potential ways to address these service gaps through future service planning, specifically related to the E-Line project, as well as the Network Next effort that we're undergoing that many of you are familiar with, as well as connecting bus planning efforts to the future Green Line extension has identified connecting bus in this corridor as well as a potential need item there. So we're aware that this is something to be thinking about, and we'll continue to be looking at that going forward. Looking at population density, we see again some very similar profiles between France Avenue and Xerxes Avenue. There are about 100 more people who live along France Avenue than who do live along Xerxes Avenue, out of 47,000 total people in the corridor, so it's a relatively small difference. Approximately the same story is true with job density. However, there's about 600 more people living along France Avenue than along Xerxes Avenue. And really the job concentrations are kind of where the story is at here. So you see this map, the 44th in France, 50th in France commercial nodes popping out there in the orange, and then looking down a little bit closer to Southdale, the Fairview Southdale Hospital really kind of gets blended in that as well. But that's where that bubble is, a little bit closer to the France Avenue alignment. And so that's an important regional jobs and services destination. percent of population below 185% of the poverty line. These are approximately equal, and really you can see some different areas pop out, but no significant difference between France Avenue and Xerxes Avenue on this section. And then the same is true for the percent people of color. So there are less than 100, there's a difference of less than 100 between these corridors of people of color out of 11,000 total people of color living along this corridor. And Xerxes Avenue has slightly more there, but still within a relatively small percentage. Jumping into our public feedback. So alternative 5 is the alternative that we're recommending. That's 44th Street to France Avenue. This was the leading contender in the public feedback in open houses that we organized. And then through much of the comments that we received on alternative 4, a lot of the rationale for people's selection of that alternative was because it served 50th and France. And of course, alternative 5 does that as well. And so we can see that aligns fairly well with our recommendation. Our key next steps for this recommendation is to be doing more outreach on the corridor through already occurring events community events on the corridor, attending neighborhood organization meetings, sharing the recommendation and the rationale, as well as doing some potential targeted door knocking and getting out on at the bus stops and potentially riding service there to share this recommendation and to make people aware of the planned open houses and public comment period for the month of November. And as soon as we have those dates specifically nailed down, we'll share that with this group. And then pending or following the public comment period, the recommended alignment will be taken before the Transportation Committee and then the full council for adoption following that. And with that, I will pause for any questions. Thank you.
All right, any questions for Katie or Kyle? Councilmember Chambliss.
I just wanted to make a comment, not necessarily a question, that I'm really happy to see that this proposal for extending transportation opportunities through this Arterial BRT, it's going to give more people access to jobs, might improve the housing opportunities as well. And I think it's great. I hope we get more of these.
Great.
Any other comments, questions? Just want to think this is great. I think make sure you, as you're going out to do some of the public engagement, to let the committee members know they definitely expressed an interest in being involved when they can to some of those things. But very good. Thank you. Can't wait to hear it.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we are on to the next information item, which is the Metro Gold Line BRT project update. Christine Beckwith.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I have a brief presentation for you today, and the goal here is just to give you an update of what the Gold Line has been up to for the last 20 months that we've been in the FTA's New Starts project development phase. And then if you stick with me for my short presentation, I have some exciting news towards the end to announce to you. So the Gold Line is actually 10 miles of BRT and dedicated Guideway. What makes this different from any other project in the Twin Cities is that it is in dedicated roadway lanes. So it's different from Orange Line and Red Line that is highway BRT on the shoulders primarily, and it's a little different than the Arterial, which operates primarily in mixed traffic. So this is on its own dedicated lane. So that's what makes that different and exciting for our region. It goes from the Smith Avenue ramp near the Xcel Energy Center through downtown with a stop at Union Depot, and then it heads out all the way to Woodbury. It serves the communities of St. Paul, Maplewood, Landfall, Oakdale, and Woodbury, with 21 new stations. 10 of those are downtown and 11 are outside of downtown. It generally follows the frontage roads of I-94. It's not on I-94. It's actually on the frontage roads generally north of that. And the cost is estimated up to $460.9 million. And I'll explain in a couple slides on why that's up to that number. as I said, it's on dedicated Guideway. This is just a quick diagram that shows the different types of configuration we have for dedicated Guideway. Some of it is in mixed traffic, and there's a couple other configurations, and we have all 4 of these on the Gold Line. So just wanted to explain what that means. Moving on to the cost slide. This project is anticipated to be funded 45% by the FTA New Start's CIG program and 55% locally. The project development phase that I'm giving you an update on today was $25 million. The engineering phase, which is the next phase, would be $75 million. But the balance is really, the bulk of the project is really once we get to construction and once we get our full funding grant agreement. So that's really where you see most of the costs expended. This slide was actually the same slide we used in a Ramsey County board meeting that we presented to them, and Washington County had a similar slide where they actually passed resolutions to fully fund the Gold Line all the way through construction, which was amazing. It's amazing to have that milestone with them, and really we've had a lot of support from our county partners. The reason it's up to $460 million is we're still working on a cost estimate. We're still finalizing scope, and we will lock in the actual project budget when we enter the engineering phase with FTA. Similar to the light rail projects, that's when we lock in. We are also making some decisions, key decisions such as the bus propulsion type. $460.9 million will cover electric buses and the infrastructure for charging those electric buses, but we haven't made the decision yet on vehicle fleet propulsion. So we're still talking about that. This shows the project timeline. As I mentioned, we're 20 months into the 2-year project development phase. We have a number of requirements to meet before we complete that phase. You see a little bit of cross-hatching at the environmental review, that green kind of squarish area. We were delayed a little bit by the federal shutdown, actually 3 months by the federal shutdown, so we are barely squeaking through all of the requirements in this 2-year period, but we think we're on track to do that. A few photos here of some of the outreach we've done. These are photos actually from the summer of 2019, but it shows we've got a couple commissioners in there. We've got some council members and a lot of staff from MnDOT, cities, and of course our Metro Transit staff and county staff. It really embodies the partnership that this project was built upon. We had all of that staff right alongside us at those meetings answering the tough questions, and it really was a great process. Another thing that was very effective for us to reach those populations that are less likely to attend an open house is by doing door knocking. So it shows our door knocking crew here that went out. We actually reached 200 individuals by doing the door knocking on that a couple of summer days in 2018. And then we also did an East Metro Garage open house. That also shows a flyer that's translated into, we had I think 4 different languages that we translated our flyers into. This is a summary of some of the outcomes and the number of people we've reached, mailings and some surveys that we did. And so we've really done a great job, I think, in our outreach staff in making sure that we get out in the community. Just quickly, I wanted to highlight the design refinements. So we have added or replaced station PED connections as we've advanced through the scope here at all of the stations outside of downtown. We've done station upgrades in downtown St. Paul. That includes, we had originally anticipated just standard bus shelters. Now will be full stations in downtown. We refined our park and rides. We had some structured parking assumed for park and rides. Now they're all surface lots. And we added a 4th park and ride at the tail end of the line there in Woodbury at the 494 park and ride. We have added 2 grade separations. So we show we've got 2 crossings there. One is under Ruth and one is over McKnight. So those were added during our advancement. We have, everybody loves this fun little bus animation here, but we are looking at those bus propulsion assumptions still, diesel, hybrid, or electric. And then lastly, we've got a couple of bridges that were added to the project, the 4th Street Bridge and the Helmuth-Bielenberg Bridge. We did get some the county got regional solicitation for that. And then we also added the Maple Ped Bridge that crosses 94. The environmental assessment, this shows just a quick summary of the resource areas that are studied and the EA comment period. So this is my big announcement. We did hear from the FTA today that they are ready to sign our EA. So that's hot off the presses and very exciting for us. So we will sign, the FTA will sign it this week and the Met Council will sign it this week. We will send it in to the Environmental Quality Board to be published. We'll send that in next Monday. And on the 7th, October 7th, we will be live for our 30-day comment period. We've got a number of open houses coming up, and we will review all the comments received and respond to the substantive comments. The top line shows the things we have completed, including a new starts application that will get us our project rating. The bottom line kind of shows the next steps, the EA being published, the response to comments, FDA issuing a decision document in January, concluding PD, and then we would apply to enter engineering. On the top here, it does show how you can submit comments on the environmental assessment, so I just wanted to leave you with that, but it wouldn't be ready to go live until October 7th. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, and congratulations on some good news. Any questions for the presenter? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So was the CTIP $6 million, was that a commitment that was made at the time that CTIP dissolved and those funds were parceled out? Is that how that worked?
Yep, Madam Chair, committee member, yes, the CTIP funds were committed. Actually, I think it was back in 2014 and 2015 or 2015 and 2016, and we fully expended the CTIP funds.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And more like a comment than a question. It's just to congratulate you and all the folks who are working on this project. I've heard from the mayor of Cottage Grove, the mayor of Woodbury, and also Washington County commissioners that are all very excited about this project. We're hoping to have it extended to Cottage Grove at some point in the future. But I think this will be great to integrate Washington County and the growing area of Woodbury with St. Paul and the rest of the region. So good work. Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? Very good. Thank you very much. We appreciate the update. Next, we are on to the Transportation Division proposed 2020 through 2025 Transit Capital Program. I'm going to add Petrie and have Heather Augustin here again. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members. Ed Petrie, Director of Finance, Metro Transit.
And Heather Augustin Huebner, Director of Finance for MTS.
We were here before you a few weeks ago going over the operating budget, and we warned you we were coming back. So we are back this evening to go over the capital budget, and it's for the period of 2020 through 2025, and we'll just move forward. And as we're moving forward, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask. I thought we'd just first of all address quickly the timeline. This won't be your first time reviewing this and considering this. This is the first snapshot. You'll take a look at it. There's going to be a lot of action that'll be taking place between now and December 11th when it's adopted. On December 9th, we're going to come back to the council. We'll do an overall council presentation with environmental services, community development, transit. We will present the budget again. Then it'll go out. We'll then come back to the council on October 23rd, where the council will then adopt the public comment draft, which will include both the operating component and the capital component. That will then go out for the public hearing or the public comment portion of it. That'll be for the public comment, will be for the period of October 23rd to December 11th. We will then return back to the council on December 11th and recommend the budget for passage at that time. We'd reflect any comments that we had received during the public comment period. One change that definitely will come forward, like we discussed it a couple weeks ago, is the fact is that we will get the new motor vehicle sales tax forecast in November. When that comes in, up or down, we will reflect that then in the 2020 budget prior to passage. We will inform the council at that time any changes. And if there's also any changes in any of these capital projects, if any projects get adjusted or whatever, we will also inform the council at that time if it's a change from the public hearing draft. So just moving into the overall capital program, it's a very extensive process that we go through here at the council. It takes a lot of planning. It's planning that basically happens all year long. This is it's a process, it's a revolving process, and it's a live process all year long. As projects are changing, projects are moving into the capital budget, projects that are completing, or funding is coming in. So this is a process that we always call it, it's like a live process that just keeps rolling. So with the CIP, basically what we'll be doing is we'll be bringing on one additional year, because the council currently adopted 2019 through 2024. A lot of those 2019 projects who are various capital amendments this year have come forward and have been adopted as the funding has become available. We will now bring on year 2025, and then also any adjustments that have happened for the projects within the 2020 through 2024 period. Most of our capital projects require a longer range view, as you would anticipate. Bus procurements, depending upon the size of bus, could be anywhere from 9 to 18 months. depending on what type of bus it is. Construction projects like garages, transitways, they're not a one-year project. They could take 2, 3, 4 years to complete. One of the things, we have major construction projects in this plan this evening, which would include the completion of the Minneapolis bus garage, blue line extension, green line extension, and some BRTs. One point that as a finance person that I always want to point out is fact is that no projects can move forward from the CIP to the capital budget until funding is secured. So at this point in time, with the budget that we're forecasting in 2020 through 2025, it's based upon our forecasted receipts of what we anticipate to receive from the federal government, regional transit capital, maybe some state funds, full funding grant agreements, those types of items. Before those projects can move forward, though, we have to secure the funding. At that point in time, once we secure it, we will then bring it forward in the capital amendment, move it from the CIP to the authorized capital program. Funding can include multiple revenue sources that we've talked about, which I'll go through in a few minutes, but it could include many different types of federal revenue, local money, RTC funds, CMAQ money, state funds. Just to give you a feel for the system size, we have a very large transportation system here at the council. Nearly 1,100 regular route and contracted buses. Those are the big buses. So between Heather's shop and my shop, nearly 1,100 buses. Over 600 Metromobility buses. We have about just over 1,100 customer shelters that we maintain within our system. We have 16 support facilities, which would include all our garages, our overhaul base, the police building, our administrative buildings, 41 rail platforms, and 65 parking structures and service slots. So it's a very large program. It's a very large capital process that we have. Just moving into some of the CIP parameters. First of all, the one thing I do want to point out is that we do have a very fiscally constrained budget. We just have a set amount of revenues, a set amount of forecasted revenues that we anticipate to receive. So so that makes it very fiscally constrained on what we can do. Overall, one of the things I also talked about too just a few minutes ago, that it is a rolling budget. Once again, 2019 is completing, 2020 is coming, 2025 is coming on, and the budget is live and it keeps rolling. Just to give you a feel, we're going to go into more detail in a few minutes, but the size of the budget. The size of the budget, including the major transit-ways like the blue line, the green line extension, 3.856, so basically $3.9 billion. So it's a very, it's hard to say, billion. It's a very large budget that we have. So we kind of look at the budget two different ways. We look at with the transit-ways, and then if you back out those two major transit-ways, we have a $1.3 billion transitway budget that Heather and I will go into more detail on it within our two divisions. Focus on the budget is safety, asset preservation, and long-term capital maintenance that we will talk about in more detail. Also, the budget includes the Metro Transit family, which would be the Metro Transit large bus, light rails, commuter rails, the Metropolitan Transportation Service family, which would include all their contracted routes and fixed routes and Metromobility, and it also includes the suburban transit providers. Overall, the 2020 through 25 capital program, the revenue sources. First of all, one of the things I want to point out is that the revenue sources that we're forecasting this evening, we reconcile all those revenue sources with all of our financial forecasts. They also reconciled in, for example, we just filed the financial management plans for both the blue line and the green line and the gold line with the FTA. So the assumptions that we're using here are the same assumptions that were used in those multi-year financial plans. So we've assumed that, first of all, regional transit capital will be increasing about 3.3% per year. That is the legislative authority that we request from the legislature every year. That is the money that we basically use to match our federal grants. Generally, most of our federal grants are an 80-20 grant. So for every dollar we apply for a grant for, you have to have 80 cents would be federal, 20 cents would be a local match. We generally use RTC for our local match. The federal funds, which reflect all of MAP 21, they're increasing at about 2.2% per year for the period of 2020 through 2025. This information has been reviewed by the FTA. They concur with our 2.2%, and they feel it's very realistic but conservative. Different formula funds are different funds that we have. First of all, we get the 5307 formula funds. Every year we file it's a cost report basically with the federal government. It's an NTD cost report that'll tell all of our hours, miles of service, ridership, Every transit agency across the United States files that same type of report. Then there's the dollars that are allocated at the federal government level, and they're then allocated across to all agencies. The Metropolitan Council, we receive about around $50 million a year in 5307 formula funds. We also get 5337 State of Good Repair funds. We get both State of Good Repair for bus, State of Good Repair for rail. The 5307 money, I'll say first of all, that can be used on bus or rail. When you get the 5337 State of Good Repair, if it's bus only. If you get it for rail, it's for rail. And then we get the 5339 bus and bus facilities, which is more of a general pop, which is used for a lot of State of Good Repair on buses. It can be used for bus procurement, but it's generally intended for more of a State of Good Repair on the bus side. Our plan this evening would also include any state bonds that are assumed to be appropriated and anticipated. And as we talked about, it would also assume that we're going to receive the new funding, the new starts federal funding for both the Blue Line and the Green Line extensions. That is our assumptions going in. So next one is maintaining the current system. Additional priorities. First of all, our priority is to maintain our assets in a state of good repair. One of the agreements that we have with the FTA, for example, for every dollar we receive in that we put into a capital asset, we have the agreement with the FTA that we will then maintain that asset in a state of good repair. For example, like large buses have a minimum life of 12 years. So we have the agreement with even though like Metro Transit, we run our buses right now at 14 years, we have the agreement with the FTA that we have to run those large buses at a minimum of 12 years. If we dispose of that bus prior to that 12-year period of time, we will then owe the FTA back their prorated portion of the federal funds. Unless, of course, a difference would be, for example, if there's some reason we have to dispose of the bus, like maybe due to an accident or something like that, we work that out with the FTA. But if it's just that we're just disposing of an asset, we would then owe the FTA the money back. All of our vehicles are replaced per fleet management plans of both the light rail side and the bus side. All those plans are also reviewed every time we submit information to the FTA. They're reviewed very closely by the FTA. Our plan assumes that we're going to maintain and repair our existing facilities. We do have some transit improvements along within our system planned, which would include significant transit development, which would include ADA pads, better bus stops, D-line, other BRTs, those types of items. Heather's going to talk about in her part of the presentation, Metro Mobility. As we talked about in the operating budget, the Metro Mobility is growing significantly higher than what normal inflation would be, significantly higher than what we're experiencing with the rest of the system. And that does have some impacts on the capital CIP process for Metro Mobility. On building the transitways and expanding the system, as we talked about, it includes both Blue and the Green Line extensions, our bus rapid transit program. We have some expansion vehicles, mainly tied to CMAQ grants. Through the TAB process, the CMAQ is awarded. We get some CMAQ awards for buses. That ties into most of the expansion vehicles. We'll talk a little bit about the bus electrification program. And this past year, we purchased 8 buses for the C line for part of our bus electrification program. As we talked about last year within the CIP program, we have a plan for our bus electrification program, but at this point in time, the bus electrification program and its associated infrastructure is unfunded. So we're doing whatever we can do to pull funds together for additional bus electrification, starting to move that process forward. And I'll talk about that when I get into the Metro Transit portion. We do have plans for a few more buses and some infrastructure. Talked about earlier, the new Minneapolis bus garage, that will complete during this CIP cycle. We have some improvements improvements on support and customer facilities and also technology. One of the things that we look at is for example, our current GFI fare systems, which is the fare boxes on the buses, are of 1993 vintage. We're having a hard time finding replacement parts for those buses or for those repairs, to make the repairs. So we have been slowly purchasing new fare boxes, new Odyssey fare boxes that will talk to the old ones. And so slowly, while we're bringing new bus procurements on, purchasing those with new fare boxes. And so we plan over the cycle of this CIP period to replace most of the old GFI fare boxes with the new GFI Odyssey fare boxes. And then also one of the things that we're also looking at is our current cubic system. Our current cubic system was last upgraded in 2009. We received this year. Now we didn't work with Cubic. We got a temporary fix, I would call it, so we can maintain PCI compliance, credit card compliance through year 2020. So that was, or 21, I believe it was. So that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at over the CIP period, is looking at our Cubic system and a potential upgrade and improvement to the new Cubic system. Asset management plan. This is the plan that we have with the federal government. We filed our first plan with the FTA back in 2018. This is the state of good repair plan that all transit agencies across the United States had to file with the FTA. This is something we did a condition assessments on our vehicles. We did a condition assessment on 1/3 of our facilities. Over the next couple of years, we will finalize a condition assessment on the rest of the facilities. And over the next year to 2 years, we will continue to do updates to our plans and provide that updated information to the FTA. But once again, this is the federal plan to maintain assets in a state of good repair. So now we'll move into the dollars, the fun part of the presentation that I always think about. We're $3.8 billion. It's a very, very large amount. One of the things that I'll point out here is you can look at the pie chart. It's mainly predominated by the transitways. The transitways, the blue line, the green line extension, the BRTs, all those predominated at about $2.9 billion, or 75% of it. The next big piece would be the purchase of fleet, which would be our replacement fleet on both Heather's side and my side, large buses, Metro Mobility fleet, and at about $701 million. We have costs for our facilities, and the other costs of $151 million are mainly the technology, fare systems, fare collection systems, those types of items. Overall, our spending during the period of time for the 2020 to 2025 period is going to include $391 million for projects that are currently authorized by the council. We plan to spend that out during this period of time. Those are projects currently authorized with funding behind them. And then this additional $3.8 billion of our plan, which will bring the plan just over to about $4.3 billion. But what we're talking about this evening is the $3.8 billion, which is the new plan for the period of 2020 through 2025. Breaking it down to the revenue types, or types of revenue. Once again, one thing I'll point out here, these numbers I'm talking about right now do include the Metro Green Line and Blue Line extensions. In a few minutes, we'll take those away. Then you'll see the whole view of the pictures and the pies are going to look a little different. But right now, with the Blue Line, Green Line extensions, $3.8 billion. 56% of the revenue is federal funds, which would mainly be New Starts funds for full funding grant agreements for the Blue and Green Line extensions. You can see then the local and county contributions, and at 33%, which would be the county contributions for those lines. We have some CMAQ funds in of $119 million, which is mainly for buses. Regional Transit Capital, which is from the legislature, legislative authority, for 323, so we can match federal dollars. And then we have some state money in at about $11 million. Now we move this on to talk about the basically uses by category and uses by objective. On the uses, on the left-hand side, by category, once again, the biggest piece will be transitways. The $2.9 million. You see we have support facilities, customer facilities, we have other capital, and other capital would include like the non-revenue vehicles, fare collection equipment, and different technology needs. Then we have our technology, and then fleet at $701 million. So on the left-hand or right-hand side, we have the uses by objective. One thing to focus on here, this pie is going to change when you see just the transportation division without the blue and green extensions, but you can see it's mainly transitways. And then you have some transitway preservation. We have a few expansion dollars, which include items like the finishing of the Minneapolis bus garage. We have some Haywood campus administrative building improvements, North Star equipment building storage, and some final costs or some beginning costs for the electric bus infrastructure. That's in the expansion piece. And then preservation is 22%, which is our base system, about $852 million. So now let's take a look at it now without the blue line and the green line extensions. Without those two extensions in, federal funds are still in at $1.3 billion. This will be for our base system. $620 million of federal. You have your regional transit capital in at $324 million. You still do have some county contributions in at $252 million, our CMAQ and our state. But this is the slide that I was talking about that you see the big difference compared to when you bring the big transitways in. On the uses by category, instead of saying the biggest piece is transitways, now our biggest piece is fleet. Replacement of fleet is number one. It's our biggest expenditure here at the council on both MTS and Metropolitan Transportation Services. Then we have our other capital, customer and support facilities, technology improvements we've talked about, like our cubic system, our fare collection upgrades, all those types of items. And then our some transitway costs, which are basically transitway costs for our current systems, our current Blue Line, our current Green Line, our current North Star costs that are going to be involved on keeping those systems going. By objective, big change from the last slide. The last one said transitways. This one is preservation. Between our transitways and our preserving our base system, 66% of our costs are preserving our system. So with the major focus of preservation, we have a slight amount of expansion in here, which would include items like, for example, the Minneapolis bus garage, as I talked about, Haywood campus admin building, North Star equipment, those types of items, and then we have some transitway costs. But overall, without the Blue and the Green Line extension, we are in at $1.3 billion.
Okay, so let's start drilling this down one more layer. You've seen this slide a lot, but as a quick refresher, in the MTS capital budget, you're going to see our contracted fixed route, Metro Mobility, Metro Red Line, suburban transit providers, and Transit Link represented. Our 6-year CIP is nearly $352 million, and over 80% of the CIP supports preservation of our existing system. And that's what you're going to see on this slide. We're at about $284 million for preservation. We fund our preservation needs through a combination of federal formula dollars and regional transit capital bonds. Fleet preservation accounts for nearly 3/4 of our budget and includes replacement of large and small buses for suburban transit providers, MTS contracted fixed route, Transit Link, and Metro Mobility. As background, our fleet category includes buses, engine and transmission replacement, and midlife bus rehabs. Technology consists of basically any technology that we need to make the system go. The vast majority of it is onboard technology, things like fare collection and cameras and computers. Our facilities is a fairly small portion of our budget, and that is just for planned infrastructure needs. Our transitway is just for the Metro Red Line. That is a transitway, so it shows up as such. It's just about $500,000 over the 6 years. And our other category represents suburban transit provider and University of Minnesota federal formula earnings, and I'll talk a bit more about those on a future slide. Between 2020 and 2025, we have just over $67 million in expansion planned. Similar to our preservation budget, expansion is primarily funded with RTC and federal funds. This chart does specifically call out federal CMAQ funding. One of the roles MTS serves is to support suburban transit provider projects submitted through the regional solicitation process. The council provides a 20% capital match as our funding is available. On average, this works out to just under $2 million annually. So what we do with the CMAQ category is we first program match funds towards projects selected by TAB through the regional solicitation process. If there's funds after that, we will fund capital match to suburban transit provider projects for other federal programs. So the priority one is anything funded by TAB. Priority 2 is other capital programs through the federal government. And our third is something that we're recommending that we do is if there's money left over in that bucket, that we allocate that to suburban providers as well. We've reached out to the suburban providers and they all have unmet capital needs. On the uses side, fleet costs represent over 90% of our expansion costs. This represents Metro Mobility expansion, suburban transit provider CMAQ expansion projects, and a holding location, as I just talked about, for future CMAQ projects in years where the regional solicitation has not yet taken place. So what happens is as TAB selects, we start out with a large overarching project, just a holding spot, which really just holds the match. As TAB identifies projects, we'll program those specific projects. So instead of seeing a CMAQ local match, you will see something like Apple Valley Transit Station expansion or a 169 project. Just we'll get more specific as we get more information. All right, so this was our story on the operating side. It's our story on the capital side too. MTS fleet, shown by the blue line, continues to grow. Growth has a number of drivers. It includes Metro Red Line implementation in 2013, suburban transit provider CMAQ expansion, and Metro Mobility. Metro Mobility fleet has grown 100% from 2014 to 2019. That's a change from 290 buses to 616 today. Just take that in for a second. We've doubled. By 2025, the Metmo fleet is projected to be nearly 900 buses. This represents a 200% growth since 2004. We continue to look at Metro Mobility. We continue to look at ways to manage the growth. The story here is we're balanced in this CIP. We are getting very close to being able to not having enough money to replace our fleet. Right, we're doing additional forecasting, but if Metro Mobility growth continues at the rate that it is, we're going to start having problems about 7 to 9 years out. A lot can happen in 7 to 9 years. We're going to continue to look at it on the ops side. We're going to continue to look at it on a financial side, but just know we're balanced now, but there's going to have to be some really hard conversations coming up with our Metro Mobility fleet and what, if any, other impacts that may have on other areas of our capital program. So the MTS CIP conservatively has over $120 million programmed for suburban transit providers. So each suburban provider has their own capital program. What you are going to see in the councils is just the money that flows through us to the suburban providers, and that is the vast majority of their capital program. So the $120 million for MBTA, Southwest Transit, Maple Grove, and Plymouth includes all 100% of their fleet replacement. So if they have a bus, 100% of that cost of replacement is carried in our capital program. It also carries their federal formula earnings. So Ed talked earlier about all the different types of federal funding. All of us have federal formula earnings, including the suburban providers. How that works is those dollars are funneled through the council, and then we hold those dollars in their capital program, and the suburban providers program those for whatever they think are the highest priority for their system. So essentially they've got, within some parameters to make sure that the projects are eligible for funding source, they have discretion about how they would like to program those dollars. We pass those through with subrecipient agreements. And there's also the dollars here for the regional solicitation, which I talked about. And there's also regional technology projects scattered throughout the CIP, which support not only the suburban providers, but our council programs as well. And that's included in this $120 million. As I mentioned before, we have reached out to all the suburban providers. All of them have unfunded needs, just as we have unfunded needs. So with that, I'll pause and answer any questions you may have. Otherwise, I'll hand it back to Ed.
Any questions? All right, keep going. Go ahead.
Okay, and now we'll move into the Metro Transit family. First of all, with the preservation or the maintaining of our current system, it's about $579 million. One of the things I do want to just give you a little heads up. One of the things that we'll be bringing forward, I'm working with Wes and with Mary Bogie, the CFO, right now. Currently, right now, Metro Transit is forecasting a surplus this year of about $10 million in our operating side, mainly due to savings and some diesel fuel, but mainly due to savings with operator labor. One-time savings, one-time money, about $10 million. One of the things that we probably will be bringing forward with our third quarter amendment will be an adjusting, taking $10 million worth of motor vehicle sales tax and moving it down into our maintenance program, our preventive maintenance, our maintenance side of our capital budget for both buses and for facilities. That's a $10 million movement. So we would plan to come back to the council with our capital budget amendment, the next amendment, third quarter, and also discuss it when we present the capital budget to the council. But I just wanted to give you this, I talked to Mary Bogie this morning or this afternoon. She said that I should mention to you that we're probably going to be bringing that forward, a $10 million recommended adjustment because of the savings, one-time money that we can use for preventive maintenance items on our capital side. Overall, with the Metro Transit service on maintaining our system, it's about $579 million. Over the period of time during this 6-year period, we're going to replace about 477 buses. They're going to include 343 your standard 40-foot buses, 101 of the Artics. We're going to add 8 more electric buses and then 25 coach buses. With our electric bus program, if you recall, we did add 8 electric buses with the C-Line, and those are articulated electric buses. The next thing that we plan to do then would be to add an additional 8 40-foot buses, which would then emulate service. That's buses that would run on our regular route service. As we had mentioned that we had a plan for the electric bus program, but we're still trying to identify funding for that program. Due to adjustments within our service plan for the coming years and adjustment to our spare factor, we were able to identify enough money so we can bring forward another 8 40-foot buses. We think that's very important for us to do because that would then emulate, as I mentioned, buses that would run on our regular route service. So the plan does include those buses. The plan also for the $579 million also includes the completion, as we talked about, the new Minneapolis bus garage. Also, one thing I did mention also with the bus RFP, the bus RFP that's going to be going out on the street very shortly will also then have options on there for more electric buses as funding becomes available. So as funding does become available with that program, we would be able to fulfill more electric buses. And also, as Rob talked about earlier this evening, the new Minneapolis bus garage will also be electric bus compatible as it's being built. Support facilities that are in this program will include items like repairs, for example, roofs, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, those types of items. Energy enhancements, which would include a lot of items within our various facilities for energy enhancements. Generally, we always do a return on investment for all the energy enhancements. Generally, they have about a 3 to 4 year return on investment. Very good investment, very good investments, very good returns from what we have experienced up to this point. Public facilities would include shelters, lighting, repairs, refurbishments, ADA pads, and signage improvements. Technology upgrades, as I talked about, will include new fare boxes, some new cubic equipment, and a planned fare collection system upgrade during this period of time. Over on the sources of revenue on the right-hand side represents what we've seen in the other charts. About 78% of our revenue would come from federal sources, 20% would come from RTC sources, 2% from the state. On the uses, the largest portion, as you would anticipate, with the 477 buses, just under 75% of our expenses will be fleet. And then we have costs for technology, customer support facilities, customer facilities, and some transit ways. Moving in on the expansion side, Metro Transit, we just have a modest amount of $39.5 million planned for some expansion. The biggest piece of that would be tied to CMAQ buses. As I mentioned, we do get some CMAQ awards for some of the various BRTs for some buses and bus improvements. Those are all tied onto the bus lines here, and that is a lot of the expansion. We do have a final one payment left on our light rail note payable. I think I'd mentioned this maybe at a previous meeting. Back in 2015, the council, that's back in the days of CTIB, the council had wanted to exercise an option to purchase 5 option vehicles for the Metro Blue Line. The total purchase price was approximately $20 million. The council had received a grant from CTIB for $6 million to purchase option vehicles. We were short $14 million from exercising that option. I worked with Mary Bogie and myself, we worked with the CTIB group, and we were able to negotiate at that point in time a 5-year interest-free note payable from CTIB. Very, very happy about that. It was set up with 5 annual installments going back at $2.8 million a year, interest-free. It allowed us to exercise the options on the Blue Line vehicles at a very favorable price. And we have one more installment due of $2.8 million in June of 2020. So very, very happy we'll have that paid off, but very happy that we also negotiated an interest-free loan. The uses down below, excuse me, we also have non-rev vehicles in this plan, some bus stop facilities, the completion of the Minneapolis bus garage, our Haywood garage modernization and admin building. We have looking at one additional park and ride and some land acquisition, money set aside for land acquisition if necessary, and transit technology improvements. You can see in the sources of revenue, 35% of it is federal, which is mainly CMAQ, and then regional transit capital in at 65%. The biggest piece of it in the use is support facilities, Minneapolis bus garage, and those different types of items are the largest sources. We have a little bit in there for fleet and customer and technologies.
Before you go to the next slide, we have a question. Councilmember Zaring?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Petrie, if we're saving $10 million to driver shortage, and we're thinking about putting that into the capital program, has there been a thought or a proposal about how we could use those funds to bolster our workforce development?
General Manager Koistra.
Yeah, Madam Chair, council members are on. We've talked about potential uses of those funds. One of the concerns that we have is that we're bringing money out of the operating budget, putting into capital budget for long-term pressures within that. But if we come back and don't have an operating budget solution, we talk about the cliff that begins in 2021. We may have to bring funds back in order to fund the operating budget. So we're putting in capital now because it's available now, but we have to have a solution to keep it in capital. So I'll mention that as far as the timing. We haven't had a long discussion about the potential uses. We know that we're really short in the long-term capital maintenance pressures on our service, on our assets. And for example, we're not funding rail rehab needs in the out years of this capital budget. We're only able to fund it in the first 3 years of the capital budget. So we have a lot of capital pressures out there. And so that's your idea can be considered among those. But I think one of the issues that I have is keeping the funding still available through 2021 in case we need to bring it back into the operating budget if there's no operating solution.
Thank you.
And Chair and committee members, I would like to add one thing if I could also. When we bring this forward into that from the operating to the capital amendment, we're just going to put it in a general project called bus and rail maintenance improvements. So before we would move any money out of a project like that into a specific project, we will have the discussion with the council. So it'll be very clear to the council when we're moving that money and going to move it someplace.
I have a second question.
Go ahead,
If you could entertain me.
Of course.
If we were to make the expansion of North Star to St. Cloud a priority, where would the funding for that come from?
Chair and committee members, that is a bill that's been before the legislature for the last 2 or 3 years. At this point in time, there is no funding identified for that. We would need a funding source. And that was part of the legislative bills that were going forward was a requested funding source on the legislature.
So we need, Madam Chair, so we need a bill passed from the Minnesota legislature to fund that.
Madam Chair, committee members, we would need identified funding. Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Transportation, the Transitway Division, as we talked about, that portion is about $2.8 billion. You can see that is mainly the Metro Blue and the Green Line extensions. We have the Gate Line, or Gold Line in here, Gateway in here for $227 million. One thing I do want to point out for the Gold Line, though, is we do have $20 million unfunded right now for the Gold Line for 2019. That is going forward as part of our legislative ask to the legislature. So that is one piece that we're still working on to get fully funded for the Gold Line. We have some partial funding in here for some of the BRT projects for D, B, and E for some preliminary engineering and design. There's $25 million in here for Rush Line. As Wes mentioned, we do have some funding in here for the North Star and LRT State of Good repairs for the first 3 years. And then we have just some other, about $7 million of just other various planning for the BRTs and some preliminary engineering. The final slide is kind of summarizing kind of where we're at with our overall CIP, $3.8 billion CIP. Without the transitways, $1.3 billion. But some of our long-term capital funding issues that we just want to briefly talk about that we do have facing us moving forward is we do have the impacts of our added rail maintenance. We all feel that, the blue line, the green lines are brand new projects and they shouldn't have maintenance, but they do have maintenance. and we're running into, for example, as the Hiawatha line, the Metro Green line or Metro Blue line is aging. We're having track improvements, track repairs, signals, all those types of things are coming to the end of their useful lives, going to start needing repairs. That is starting to lay out into our future years CIPs. So that is some of the impacts that we do have within this plan. One of the things that's going to require us to talk with our funding partners, whether it's the counties or whether it's the state or a combination thereof, to help us identify as a partnership funding to maintain our assets moving forward, especially the rail assets moving forward. BRT transitways for future regional transit growth, like I mentioned, a lot of them are unfunded right now. We're short $20 million for the Gold Line. The rest of the BRTs, whether it's the D or B or E, we have some preliminary dollars set, but the balance of them are unfunded and have no funding identified as this point in time. MAP 21, which is a federal requirement, says that we must maintain, if any assets that do have a federal dollar in them, we have the agreement with the FTA that we do maintain those assets in a state of good repair. So that's a commitment that we have made with the FTA that we will continue to fulfill and identify how we can maintain our assets, keep our buses at 12 years, et cetera, and meet that 12-year life. Metro mobility growth is one of the challenges that Heather talked about. During this CIP period, we feel that we are covered on metro mobility growth, but if the expansion continues, as we're anticipating it will, in the next couple of years after, beyond this CIP, we're going to start seeing some major challenges on metro mobility. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll bring us right back to the timeline. This is your first view of the CIP this evening. Heather and I will be back on October 9th to the full council, doing another the same presentation at that point in time. It'll come back to the council then on the 23rd for the adoption of the public hearing draft, both operating and capital. It'll go up then for the public comment, come back to the council then on December 11th for adoption. And with that, Madam Chair, we would stand for any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the presenter? Councilmember Sterner.
Right, thank you, Chair. I just had a couple that are kind of unrelated a little bit. But one is, have you had any experiences on having buses last over the 12 years on a lower one? I mean, do we experiment with that, or is it 12 years kind of like the south cutoff, especially when we're looking at revenue issues here?
Madam Chair, committee members, right now our buses are actually, Metro Transit buses are actually on a 14-year life.
14-year. Okay.
The minimum is 12 years with the FTA, but basically due to with the buses, the type of technology that's running, we're finding that the buses are able to run longer than 12 years. So we're trying to maximize the dollars, and I believe it was last year, we pushed our buses up to a 14-year life. But we're continuing to monitor that. Looking at the buses as they're coming, as the repairs are coming. Because most buses can hit the 14-year life, but for example, if you get a bus that needs, let's say, a transmission or an engine or something like that, beyond the 12-year life, we may question whether or not it's really worth putting the additional dollars in. So that is one thing that we're watching very, very closely. I know our maintenance staff are watching very closely, like all the fluids, looking at how it's using oil. Now you're talking to a finance guy, but these are things I've heard. But they're Vince is probably chuckling back there. But they're looking at oil usage, transmission wear, and all those types of items that we can monitor to see whether or not the buses is 14-year a good life. Can they stretch to 15? Do we have to pull it back to 13? Those are some of the things that we are analyzing right now.
Okay, and then just a second question is on the non-revenue producing vehicles, like police cars and the management vehicles. You're looking at electric on those for being the startups. I know like New York City's had good success with police cars, and locally some of our other agencies are using the Bolts, for example, as vehicles. I'm just wondering, are those purchases looking to be electric going forward?
I believe
General Manager Cloister.
I believe they are. They have a couple, I think, right, Madam Chair. I believe they have a couple electric vehicles right now. Yeah. Brian? Bring the expert up.
You need to sit up front, apparently, because we call you up occasionally.
I guess so. Good afternoon. So to answer the question, yeah, we are looking at electric vehicle applications for the non-revenue fleet as well. We have several that are in the pool vehicle category, so sort of the shared vehicles. Our engineering and facilities department has a couple. We're testing plug-in hybrid technology for street supervision. Also engage the police department for discussions about when those types of vehicles also can become available for their applications. So continuing to look for those opportunities and then match that up against available funding and sort of balancing all of our resources.
Okay, thank you.
General Manager
Yeah,
DeWitt, do you
I
have a
just,
comment?
I just wanted to emphasize the importance of extending the life of the buses from 12 to 14 years. That was a decision that was made to do that temporarily to fund the new Minneapolis garage, because we had tried for year after year after year to get the legislature to support it, the new garage, and we couldn't get their support. So that was the funding strategy for the new Minneapolis garage. And in this capital budget, we've made the decision to extend that strategy going forward, while, as Ed mentioned, monitoring it closely. But it allows us to go, extending the life of those buses allows us to go as far as we have gone with a capital budget, even with still with some unmet needs. And the other thing I wanted to mention was, I think, Ed, you said that Gold Line was 20 million short, and I know you meant D Line. And
D-line, I apologize. Yes,
I wanted to make
apologize.
that
Thank you.
correction because we just had said earlier that Gold Line was fully funded.
Good clarification. Thank you. It's D-line.
Thank you. Additional questions from council members? Councilmember Chambliss.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the overview and the many opportunities to get to the point where we're starting to understand some of the lingo and some of the abbreviations and where the money comes from and where it goes. I understand that we have some capital financial constraints through 2025. I get a lot of questions about, of course, we get questions about our BRTs and our light rail, but I get a lot of questions about how we're going to increase transportation in the suburbs. Having weekend service or having more routes in the evening. Not so much in here for that. I mean, we've got an extra 8 buses. We have the bus driver shortage. Is there a way that we can look at our wish list and figure out how far are we from where we were before we had some of these constraints? And and how could we close them even beyond 2025?
Madam Chair, I've been kind of a broken record on this, so forgive me, but this is why the governor presented his proposal to the legislature last year, because of this very issue, that we have demands for service, there are service expectations out there, and right now, under the current funding structure, we're unable to meet those demands. And I'll say again, because you brought it up, that the last 2 segments of funding we've received from the legislature appropriations has been one-time funding for ongoing needs that they knew were ongoing. 70 million, I think, in 19 and 20, and
36.
Pardon me?
36 million.
And 36 million most recently. That's one-time money that doesn't continue on in the following years. And so until we get a stable funding source, it's really hard to make those service expansion commitments. And it requires that both in terms of operating funds and in terms of capital funds. So I'm going to use, when people say, why can't we do X? I'm going to keep saying this because that's the reason. We don't have a long-term stable funding source for transit, and we need one.
And I will
people's
fully echo
expectations.
that. I think that is, clearly you've seen the budget issues, and we're also going through the efforts with Network Next to figure out what we want the system to be and how we want it to grow. But some of those things can only be done if there is funding. Director Thompson.
I'll add to that too. If you do think about the transitway investments that are in the capital plan, many of those routes are suburban oriented. Gold Line, Rush Line, no. Of course, what you're probably hearing about is also local service, and that's I think what Wes is bringing up, where the governor's proposal would help with the local service too. But hopefully, at least the transitway, if we move forward with it, plan and they're built, that is one step forward on connecting some of the suburbs. And those transitways tend to have evening hours, weekend hours that come with them. So that is one positive I would say in that issue.
Right. Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, just one point, and part of the reason of my bringing this up is to make sure that we keep that visible. And I know we have to meet our program and planning needs, but we can always shoot a little higher and make sure that people are aware that we're not catching a lot here.
We love every opportunity to rise that,
Okay, good.
have that awareness. It's important for our long-term plans. So, any additional questions, comments? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate
With
it.
that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded. We're adjourned.